Hello friends. Today's video is going to be a list of some books where it seems like everybody else adores these. They have really high average ratings on Goodreads, and I thought they were just fine. Typically with these sorts of videos, I find that people, when they discuss books that everybody else loves, they kind of go about it with I have the complete polar opposite opinion. Everyone loves these, and I think they suck. I think they're absolute garbage. I think what's different here is that I didn't hate any of these. I didn't think they were the worst things I'd ever read. I didn't come away from them really angry. There are some books I read where I truly think, what a waste of time. It's not the case for any of these. I just kind of came away from them not with a lot of emotions. I thought it'd be fun to chat through some of these. Obviously, I am exaggerating when I say everyone. There's billions of people on the planet. Could you imagine if literally everybody else loved these and I was like, not me. But typically within the fantasy circles that I am a part of or that I follow, some of my friends here on BookTube will discuss these books and sing their praises. They lose their mind over them, and then once I've picked them up, I feel a little bit like the odd gal out. And so I'm just gonna jump right into it. The first one that I'm gonna start with would be Foundryside by Robert Jackson Bennett. This is one that I think is definitely a little bit more of a BookTube darling. For a while there, it seemed like so many people were chatting about this one. It's not reached the same levels of popularity as some of the other ones on this list, but here on BookTube and on the Bookternet, it definitely seemed like one that was getting a lot of hype in fantasy circles. And I understand why, because the magic system for the story sounds so cool, and it is cool, and it was really unique. The concept behind it is that inanimate objects can be essentially coded to have their perception of reality warped in order to serve a certain purpose. The example that's given at the beginning of the book is that there's a certain wagon where the code has been made so that the wagon believes that the wind is blowing, and thus it moves in the direction that it thinks the wind is pushing it. And then there are some mechanics that then you can change it and it will go a different direction or it will stop. That way, obviously, it's not going to just crash into things or never go a different direction. And that concept is not only really unique, but it does create for some really cool advancements in technology in their world in ways that are, of course, separate from how technology has advanced in our own world. And then on top of that, it does make for some really exciting action scenes. It also seems like the magic has so much potential to be built upon in the other books. So there's a lot about it that I thought was really cool, but I thought that the tone was a little strange. It felt rather juvenile, and the action scenes were cool, but sometimes they would be incredibly violent, but juxtaposed to a kind of campy way of the characters communicating with each other and acting, and I just never connected to the plot. I never really connected to the characters, and those are kind of the two main things, right? We usually find we're character-driven readers or we're plot-driven readers, and when I wasn't gripped by really either of them, it just meant that it was kind of a little bit of a miss for me. Again, didn't hate it, just thought it was fine. For all of these, I'm also going to let you know the average rating. For Foundryside, that first book in that trilogy, the average rating is 4.2. The next book on the list is not the thing that made me want to do this video. I'd had this video idea in mind for a while, but this book definitely solidified for me. It was almost like it was a sign. It kind of was like, you know what, this fits perfectly with this concept, so just go for it. That would be Fourth Wing. I made a video that is about an hour long, talking about why this book, basically this concept of, wow, people really like this, I'm happy for them. So this one's average rating is 4.74 currently. I imagine it will slowly go down, but I think it's going to maintain that shockingly high average rating. I think it's going to continue to be much higher than the majority of other adult fantasy books. And actually, technically, this one is new adult. But anyway, this follows a war school where a young woman named Violet, who goes by Vi a lot of times, she doesn't want to go to the school. She has been training to become a scribe, but her general mother pushes her into this school and is very cutthroat it's kill or be killed sort of a setup. The other cadets can kill you so long as you're not sleeping. And the reason that everybody is so cutthroat is because there is a limited number of dragons willing to bond to humans, and specifically the humans that get through all the trials of this war college. And because there's a limited amount, even if you make it through the trials, there's no guarantee the dragons are going to bond to you. So the more people that you can get out of there, the higher your chances of bonding a dragon. That's the setup for the story. And there's also a pretty heavy romantic subplot. And I didn't hate this. Like, I'm gonna be kind of broken record in this video. I didn't hate it. I was not moved by it in any capacity. I also found the dialogue pretty cheesy. The stakes I thought were kind of cheesy at times, but it was very entertaining. It's just pure entertainment. It's one of those types of stories, or at least it was for me. Not going to be for everyone, of course. But I think this kind of epitomizes this concept of, wow, happy for all of you that are liking it, but no. Next up, we have the Malazan series. The first book actually has, as far as in comparison to the other books on this list, a rather low average rating. It's actually 3.91. Not that that is low overall. That's still a good average rating. It's just much, much lower than, like I was just saying about Fourth Wing, 4.74. Although that's just absurd all around. But anyway, the second book, which is called Dead House Gates, has a 4.26. So that's quite an increase from book 1 to book 2. And I did read those first 2 books. I don't know that I agree that it increased in quality that much from book 1 to book 2. Of course, there's other things to incorporate. Some people who read the first book, who aren't interested in continuing on, are going to leave a lower rating, and then they're not going to continue on, whereas the people that liked book 1 likely to continue on with the series, and they do think the second one's better also. So it makes sense that you would see quite an increase. It is large, though, is my point. Regardless, I thought that these were fine, like everything else on this list. I am honestly kind of shocked that people think it is so incredible, and if you're about to be like, well, you can't really understand the brilliance of the series until your third read through, you can type that if you'd like. I'm not going to read it 3 times. I'm not even going to read the series through 1 time. I didn't care for it. I thought it was fine. It was fine. I think that the writing is really good. I think that, as silly as it is to say, I think that the vocabulary is really good. I think it's clear that it is a very thought out world. I think Steven Erikson clearly, if you were to pick up these books, has thought through so much when it comes to the culture and the history and the relationships between various different countries. I think it's very clear. There's so much to it, and it's a much larger type of story than what a lot of people typically find in the fantasy that they pick up. It is truly epic on epic proportions. So I do see the appeal in that. However, for me, sort of what I was saying earlier about the characters don't click and the plot doesn't click, I don't find either of those things to be the strongest points for Malazan. And I think that it is so much more thematically driven, but how the themes are put into the story also, for me, while I appreciate them, I don't think that their delivery, I don't think it accomplishes evoking the kinds of feelings that a lot of other people end up feeling. When they read this, you'll hear so many times, wow, there's such a strong theme of compassion in this story. Or they'll talk about certain characters. Felicen is a big one, and they'll talk about how moved they are by her story. And I'm always really happy when people feel really impacted by what they're reading. I think that that's fantastic. I never once, not once, felt impacted by anything in that story. And I think a big reason it does come back to the characters. I found that the characters often, they would have a distinct personality, and their circumstances would affect them. But then when you would get their internal thoughts, they would all sound the same. And it ended up feeling like they would suddenly become empty. They would just be vessels through which Erikson would be able to speak on whatever the themes are, or to essentially have a very philosophical discussion. I felt that if you're going to do this through their internal voices, I want their internal voices to match their personalities and the way in which it would make sense for them to think. I think it's very true that anybody can be capable of having profound thoughts. It just, for me, it still needs to fit with their voice. And it didn't really end up feeling like that. And so then the themes, it just kind of felt like these characters, it didn't end up having the depth that I was hoping for. Not to say that it objectively has no depth or anything like that. I just, anytime I see people getting choked up talking about this series or how moved they were moved to tears, I'm always like, how? And I'm, again, so happy that there's just different writing styles that pull different things out of us, and it didn't pull anything out of me. I don't know why, but I feel like pausing before saying it didn't pull anything out of me sounds like, I don't know, that I went to the emergency room for having something stuck. I also just am not the biggest fan of how he delivers the world building. I prefer to navigate the world through the characters, find out information that is pertinent to them, and it oftentimes feels like he provides you with so much backstory to a certain area, to a certain culture, to a certain relationship between this person and this person. And those aren't necessarily your main characters, but those are people that existed in the past, and then things happened between them and that affected the city, and then that happens to be the exact spot that the character you're following is standing right now. That kind of world building, not my personal favorite. I don't like being told about the world. I like learning about the world through the character as they traverse it. So that's another thing for it that didn't really work for me. And then also, you'll often hear people say, well, Steven Erikson, most people are used to having their hand held, and he doesn't hold your hand. And I think there's a difference between holding your hand and dropping your child off in the middle of nowhere and being like, figure out how to get home, dummy. He's a little bit purposefully obscure and convoluted at times. I think if you have a whole scene where you don't have a character named, and then later on that character is just in a scene and you have to think, wait, was that the character from that one scene where nobody's names were used? And I don't mean in the dialogue, I mean their names are not used even in the narrative. That doesn't really feel like I don't have my hand held. And also, I feel like my hand is held when it comes to the world building. So there's just so many things about it are not to my preferences. Next up, we have the Poppy War. This is one where so many of the things worked really, really well for me, and then other aspects of the story were a little bit aggravating at times. An example, a specific thing, is the main character, Rin, is somebody who ends up going to essentially a war school, very different from Fourth Wing though, and she doesn't have the same kind of experience as a lot of the other individuals at this school, and she ends up being instructed in a slightly different style of fighting, and just that little bit of a different style makes her able to compete with everyone else. And that way of writing an underdog is not as appealing to me, but it's a small example. I think a bigger example, and the thing that led me to not want to continue on, was actually a certain way in which the main character Rin flip-flops at times. So there's a part of the story, I won't say at what point, because there's a lot of tonal shifts. It starts out bleak for her, and then it seems rather hopeful in her having some form of a future, and then it gets really, really brutal and horrifically violent. And through this journey, there is a point where Rin does something horrible, absolutely atrocious. She does something it has a lot of repercussions, we'll say. And at first she's kind of like, what have I done? And then somebody kind of calls her on it. They sort of pose the same question, and they're kind of like, what have you done? And she's like, excuse me, they deserved it. It was just such a flip-flop. However, this is one where I could easily see myself rereading that first book and then continuing on with the trilogy. Last on the list, Shadow Rising. And you might be like, what's that? Wheel of Time, book 4. Oh, I forgot to say the average rating for the Poppy War. It's 4.17, so also very high. But anyway, The Shadow Rising, 4.27. This is the 4th book in the Wheel of Time, as I said. And this is the one in the series that so many people will tell you it's one of the best in the series. If you are going to start Wheel of Time, at least read through book 4, because pretty much everybody gets to book 4 and then they have to keep going. It's so good. It's so exciting. There's such interesting things that happen with the characters. You see so many people say it's a rare person that reads through book 4 and doesn't want to continue. And I'm like, book 4 is the one that made me realize there's no way I can do 10, 11 if you count the prequel, more books of this. I can't do it. I cannot stand how these characters behave. I cannot stand how bad they are at communicating. I can't stand the way that the romances are written, and I can't stand the way they all act less mature than so many of the characters that you find in young adult books. It's baffling to me. These characters are so annoying. I am so happy so many people love this series. I feel really bad. I'm really sorry. I just can't stand basically any of them. Some of them will be cool and then they do something incredibly dumb and you're like, what are you doing? Or certain people who are cool, you can just tell their plot lines are about to go in a super boring direction. I've heard about the slog. I can guess where it's going because I can just see by the end of this book. Anyway, point is, I was not blown away by that book. It's funny because I'm like, I thought these books were fine, and it sounds so negative about this one. So I've been harping about how annoying the characters are. I didn't get angry at this book. I just couldn't believe there were 10 more after that, and I couldn't hang with these characters. I didn't root for a single one of them. I was like, maybe the dark one should win. That's it for some books that it seems like so many people really love, so many people really respect, and I didn't really have any strong positive or negative feelings, which it seems like that's not true based off of how I just spoke of The Shadow Rising. But really, truly, I didn't get angry at any of these books. I didn't want to throw them across the room. I didn't want to burn them in a blazing fire. They were fine. They were all fine for me. I'm very curious what books fit this description for you. And then also for the ones I mentioned, do you feel similarly? Do you feel very, very differently? Or are you like, well, I'm glad they were just fine for you because they were the worst thing ever for me. I would love to know your thoughts. I also have so many other books written that fit within this topic. So if you'd like to see me do a part 2 to this, if you want to hit is it a like button or a thumbs up button? I don't even know. And I've been doing YouTube for a long time. But anyway, whichever one, because then I can see the average of what I usually have percentage-wise for likes, and I can compare it, and if it is significantly higher, then I'll know that you would like me to do a part 2. Anyway, I'm also going to do sort of the reverse of this, where I talk about books that it seems like everyone hates, and I just thought they were fine. I didn't hate them, but I didn't love them either. And then we'll get around to doing true unpopular opinions. Although I think some of the ones I mentioned here were also unpopular. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you later.